Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, The New Standard for an API-first Headless CMS. I'm Alexandra Barcelona, Director of Marketing at dotCMS, and I'll be today's moderator. To get started, we'll go through a little bit of housekeeping. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be sent out to everyone who registered after the webinar. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end, so please submit your questions in the panel on your screen. Today's agenda, first we'll be going over how to engage with customers on new channels, headless versus traditional versus hybrid CMS, setting your digital ambition, headless experience in dotCMS 5.1, dotCMS as a hybrid CMS, and then our Q&A at the end. I'd like to introduce today's speakers. We have Tony White, founder of Ars Logica, and Stefan Schinkel, enterprise sales at dotCMS. Tony, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Alex. I'd like to think about engaging customers in new channels. That's going to be the backdrop for this discussion of content management platforms. And we're going to look at traditional CMSs, headless CMSs, and hybrid CMSs. But we're going to do it with the idea of how to engage customers coming to you in new channels with each one of these. So let's think about what those new channels might be. They might be wearables, an Apple Watch. It might be some type of digital signage. It might be an IoT connected device, an AI system, or maybe even a voice assistant. The thing to think about in interacting with customers in these new channels is that you may not have control from the perspective of the application you are using over the presentation layer that the customer experiences. So this is really one of the primary benefits of headless. I'm getting a little bit ahead of the presentation, but I want to introduce this concept here because there is this rather new idea in the industry that you don't need to have control over the presentation layer. And so we're going to take a look at that in a little bit more depth over the next 20 or 25 minutes or so. So let's look at conventional CMS, the front end and back end. We're going to do this because as you think about conventional CMS, hybrid CMS, with the conventional CMS on the back end, you have a database that manages the content lifecycle from the time the content is created until the time it's expired and even beyond. You control the layout with templates and CSS, and you integrate plugins into the back end to expand the functionality of the database or the conventional CMS. And on the front end, content is rendered in HTML. That HTML could be on a traditional web browser on a laptop. It might be on a smartphone. It might be on other types of devices, but in any case, the content is typically rendered in HTML. With a conventional CMS, platform architecture is tightly linked, and that means that there is limited flexibility to add new delivery channels or touch points. The content creation, editing, and storage of digital assets is on the back end. So designers and editors, as we mentioned before, typically use templates and cascading style sheets. And content, as we also mentioned, is rendered in HTML, and that HTML is often static. With a headless CMS, and let's keep in mind the channels and touch points that we started off with. We're going to think about delivering content to potentially unknown destinations with a headless CMS. So in order to do that, if you think about the backend and the channels and touch points being really not touching each other, we're going to take a look at how content is delivered, what it's delivered to, and what kind of control you have over the delivery of that content. So with a headless CMS, the content is delivered from the backend to an API, and the point of interaction between the channels and touch points and the CMS happens between the API and the destination of the content. So the communication between the backend to the API is one way, and then there's a two-way communication between the API and the delivery point of the content. So the front end of a headless CMS can be agnostic. It doesn't matter at all what it is. Web services and APIs enable content delivery to any kind of front end. APIs connect the front end and the back end. The API becomes the locus of control for publishing and delivery. The benefits of this setup, some of the benefits, not all of them, is that you essentially future-proof your CMS due to the flexibility and channel agnosticism of the platform. You don't have to worry about the front end. You suddenly have a lot more flexibility. You have compatibility with any front end, and the speed of content delivery is dramatically improved with a headless CMS. You can imagine the overhead that having to manage front end adds to the overall system architecture. You also have improved ease of integrations due to a universe of third-party APIs and web services. So if you think about a potential service that you'd like to add to a headless content management platform, those APIs often come pre-built from third parties. You basically can just plug them in. So the ease of integration is dramatically reduced with a headless CMS. And consequently, the burden on developers is also lightened. So offloading management of the content at the delivery or presentation layer is another way to think of one of the benefits of headless CMS. There are also scenarios for which headless CMS is not a good fit. As we mentioned before, in a headless CMS, the communication basically between your content and the end user, there's a one-way handoff between the back end, and then there's a back and forth between the API and the destination. So if you're thinking about a mobile or a web app in which security is mission critical, you can pretty quickly realize that you don't really have that much control in a really secure sense the way you would want with, say, an online lending application. Initiatives that require frequent streamlining of content by marketing, any kind of marketing campaign, updating a website, or some sort of web optimization project would also not be a good fit for CMS because you need control over that front end. You want control in these kinds of initiatives over every layer of the stack. You don't really want to hand it off. And so that front end agnosticism really wouldn't be a benefit at all. You definitely want to retain control here. So with a headless CMS, a best fit scenario, I've mentioned three criteria here. So with headless CMS, DevOps can really effectively control the content. You want to make sure that DevOps can effectively control the content, is what I'm trying to say, in a headless CMS, because you have given up the control for the marketer in the headless CMS. So DevOps is really going to have to be able to effectively control the content. You want to choose use cases where agnostic delivery is a requirement or an advantage, and there are plenty of them where the agnostic delivery is not a requirement and it may actually be a disadvantage. And also headless is good in situations where security is paramount. Traditional CMSs are good for initiatives that require frequent website updates, marketing campaigns, and optimization and personalization projects. So these are very general categories, but basically the theme is that in a headless instance, the back and forth, the frequent back and forth is between the API and the destination. In a traditional setup, the back and forth spans that whole range from the back end to the front end. There is a third option, however. And the third option is a hybrid between the two. I don't want to make the idea of a hybrid implementation sound too simple, because in certain situations you're going to want to have a traditional setup where you have intense marketing campaigns. You want to have full control over the front end, and you want to have very frequent interactions between marketers and the content. So that's a traditional setup that I'm describing there. In other situations, you're going to want to have a headless setup. A hybrid implementation is a combination of the two, but it's a very well thought out combination of the two that gives you the ability to use one type of setup in one situation and the other setup in a different situation. But the benefits are pretty obvious in that the hybrid option would cover traditional and headless scenarios, and you can mix and match traditional and headless scenarios. You have a common set of technology training and development skills. That's not really to be taken too lightly, because some companies are actually trying to use hybrid, but they don't use a hybrid CMS platform. They're basically doing hybrid, but they're doing it independently. They're actually doing double labor because they're not using a common set of technology training and development skills. Their CMS is essentially not designed to be hybrid. They're just, by creating a workaround, sort of trying to do hybrid. They don't really get the benefits of the common technologies. And then another side benefit of the last point is that you have unified pricing. Some common goals of companies that are choosing headless CMS platforms is that they extend the longevity of their CMS and DX implementations. They increase the ability to integrate with third-party technologies. They break the dependence between the management and delivery components of CMS and DX platforms. They reduce vendor lock-in. And they free up their developers from presentation considerations. I introduced the topic here of reflecting on the roles of various components within a CMS. I introduced this so that we can start thinking about it, but I'm going to ask Stefan in the next section to address the role of templates, the content API, content structure, development languages, especially as related to the learning curve and vendor lock-in, creating applications, and cloud considerations as each of these relate specifically to the dotCMS platform. So I'd like to leave you with a graphic that repeats one of the points made earlier, is that in that hybrid CMSs can cover the scenarios of headless and traditional scenarios, but they do require quite a bit of thought about which type of CMS you want to use for which projects. So I don't want people to leave with the idea that it's as simple as sort of wiggling your nose using a hybrid CMS and being able to address both headless and traditional scenarios instantly. It takes quite a bit of thought, but the benefits are, in most cases, more than worth the effort. And with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Stefan Schinkel at dotCMS.
Okay, Tony, thanks for the introduction and setting the stage here. Yeah, we're going to talk about the new standard for API-first Headless CMS. But before we go into that, there's a couple of slides I would like to share with you. Most of you guys are executing on your digital ambition, whether it's optimizing or transforming the business or both. And that's where we come in, right? Where we want to, give you the tools, the content foundation as a service that allows you to build, orchestrate, and create your digital experience platform to deliver what we call connected, trusted, and continuous customer experiences. And then we do that by delivering a cloud-ready, cloud-native, decoupled, open framework, where we also aim for the highest level of no-code in the industry, right? Because we want you to win, right? And winning in the digital space and digital era means that you have to focus on the experience rather than your products and services, as well as hyper-personalization. And with dotCMS 5.1 coming out next week, we basically want to deliver we call an undisrupted experience for both marketing teams as well as developers. So for a marketing perspective, we believe it's all about an editor experience, right? So give you continued access to key marketing tools such as preview, inline editing, drag and drop, page composition, layout management, managing page templates, as well as personalization. Now, on the IT side, we believe it's all about freedom of innovation, right? So any framework or technology that you would like for the front end, the presentation of content, creating experiences is supported. We deliver also low-code API tools to build those REST endpoints, which is crucial, obviously, in a headless deployment. And we're also very excited to deliver native GraphQL support. So the new standard for API-first Headless CMS is really a true hybrid CMS, in our opinion, right? And we deliver our product vision with these 4 pillars, where hybrid is actually one of the pillars. And when we talk about hybrid CMS or hybrid dotCMS, really comes down to 4 aspects, right? So it's the deployment of the CMS itself, could be on-premise, dotCMS cloud, and hybrid, right? So we have customers actually deploying dotCMS in that scenario, in the hybrid scenario. Content rendering, native, traditional, headless, or both in a hybrid scenario. Content publishing, static content, dynamic, or both, again, from the same dotCMS instance. And lastly, content authoring, right? Majority of the content marketing teams work through the native authoring environment, the native UI, that we deliver with dotCMS. But we also see more and more custom apps for the content authoring process. Building very simple, dedicated mobile apps for field staff, right? And obviously you can do both at the same time, which makes it hybrid, right? So most vendors only talk hybrid with regards to content rendering, right? So when we talk about hybrid CMS, it means a little bit more, and that's where we believe we differentiate from most of our competition. Now, we did some research in our customer base and asked a couple of questions about how they leverage dotCMS, and almost 50% is already utilizing dotCMS in a hybrid scenario with regards to content rendering, right? So that's fairly high. Pure native, traditional content rendering, 34, and pure headless, 17. Now, when we drill down into the last two categories, traditional and pure headless, and we were asking for plans to change in the next 12 months, we saw that 76% of those two categories is moving to the hybrid model, right? So that's a nice trend. 20% will stay where they are in the next 12 months. They may change beyond that, but for the next 12 months, no changes. And 4% is moving to a pure headless model. So quite interesting. Now, when we're asking for the key drivers for these changes, this was the top three, right? So they were able to pick multiple options here, but 56% really want more flexibility in general for both marketing and IT. 40% faster time to market or time to value was regarded as a key driver, and then 35% reducing the total cost of ownership, right? So a hybrid CMS can really contribute to those key drivers. Again, what we want to bring to the market next week with dotCMS 5.1, and then really focusing on the capabilities around headless. First of all, for the marketers, edit mode anywhere, really give you undisrupted access to preview, inline editing, drag and drop, and page templates is huge. For the development teams, two key capabilities: API tools, again, low code, no Java, to build those REST endpoints that are super important. And then lastly, native GraphQL, so support for the GraphQL API as well as the query language. Like to call out a URL that you see here on the slide, where we have short videos of each capability improvements that we're going to bring. There's more than these three, so I encourage you to go to the page and check those individual videos, right? So you don't have to watch the whole recording of the webinar from a couple of weeks ago. Then beyond 5.1, there's a number of capabilities that we're currently contemplating. First of all, in the continuity pillar, personalization next gen, really taking our personalization capabilities to the next level. Maybe combine it with campaign management. Digital marketing teams execute primarily a lot of campaigns, so we want to support that. Do journey mapping, also pretty important for driving online revenue and conversion. And then from a more technical perspective, CI/CD, continuous integration and continuous development, is also an important item that we're considering. Intelligence, we want to double down on analytics and reporting, predictive analytics, really the primer for testing and and experiments. I'm missing a marketing tool right now, so really want to focus on that in the next couple of releases. And then obviously we want to continue to deliver no-code capabilities, ongoing UI UX enhancements, and the UI and UX for new capabilities. That's it from my end. Thank you very much. I think I want to open up for Q&A. All right. All right, guys. Let's see what we got here. Let me see. One question, and I think this is for you, Tony. Question from the audience. If security is paramount, why on the previous slide did it say that Headless isn't good for experiences where security is important? For instance, a lending site.
Well, first of all, let me just double check that my mute is not on. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So the idea there is that with a lending application, for example, you're going to have an awful lot of back and forth between the API and the content delivery destination. So you basically want to do absolutely everything you can to lock the content down. Just totally lock it down and not have it being edited or changed during a potential lending process. And so by totally locking it down and making the content basically live between a totally locked down environment and the borrower, you are able to obtain a much tighter level of security than you can if it's not totally locked down. So that's the idea there. A lot of technical detail behind it, but the idea is that you want to create basically a totally firewalled situation for content within a lending application in a way that makes it rather ideal for a headless implementation.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that. We, a couple of months ago, as part of a CMS selection process for a federal institution, we did actually a POC in a headless scenario where we were exposing content over REST APIs combined with authenticated exchange of content, and it actually works really well. I mean, the POC was a huge success, so we signed this customer up. So I don't necessarily agree that you are exposed to more security risks in a headless scenario. Not at all. And there's definitely standard capabilities that we offer that will help you to keep your application secure. Because I see a lot of headless implementations, or that's the initial ask. And then quickly they move to a hybrid scenario, and particularly in financial services, right? Where, well, I think in any vertical, security is important, but obviously within financial services, it's even more so. Another question. How can I tell if a CMS is actually a true hybrid CMS? Are there any red flags to look for? What's your take on that one, Tony?
My take on that one is that sometimes it can be a little difficult to tell whether the situation that you're going to use the CMS for is better in a headless or a traditional situation. And the other comment is that of the, how many CMSs are available on the market, hundreds and hundreds of them, they all come with different combinations. And so comparing one to another, it might not be so easy to tell which one has, the better headless capabilities. So I think you really have to take it on a case-by-case basis. But the hallmark of headless CMS is the ability to insert that middle layer, the API, and to make the locus of control right there at the API. So API first, if you see marketing collateral or sales collateral describing an API first CMS, that's a good indication that it's very likely got considerable headless capabilities.
Yeah, and in addition to that, yeah, I mean, there's a couple of questions you can simply ask, right? I mean, if you take it to a more technical level, is it a decoupled architecture? Is content strictly separated from the presentation layer? And can I, actually do both? Expose the content over REST APIs in a headless scenario. But does your solution also offer a presentation tier where I, for instance, could build landing pages, right? That's what I would look for. And I think that's, if you're looking for a true hybrid CMS, I mean, I call out a couple of aspects, how we define hybrid CMS. But I think the key thing is that being able to have a central content hub, create the content only once, and then expose it as often as you want, either over REST APIs or onto your proprietary delivery tier as much as you like. I think that's golden in a hybrid CMS, along with the other capabilities that I just called out. All right, those questions keep coming. Good stuff. Does commerce integration lend itself to a better option or of choice, headless versus hybrid? Tony, what do you say about that one?
I don't think there's anything that's unique about commerce that would influence that decision one way or the other. It's more about the use case that you're going to try to implement. So, commerce doesn't really influence you one way or the other in itself.
Yeah, I agree with that. I will say that there's a huge traction also in headless commerce, where you basically see those commerce vendors really focus on the transactional part of the e-commerce play, along with inventory, PIM, and all that good stuff. And then you see that the experience part is taken care of by CMS, obviously, because that's the core of a CMS. But I agree with you. I think headless hybrid doesn't necessarily play better, in the commerce play. So I agree with you on that one, Tony.
I will mention for the person who asked that, though, that there's a very good short book by O'Reilly called Microservices for Modern Commerce. It talks about increasing development velocity by applying microservices. So that's a good resource to turn to.
Great, thanks for that. Another question, any features in dotCMS 5.1 that stand above competitors at the moment? Yeah, I would say everything. No, kidding there. But I will say that the edit mode anywhere is definitely a capability where we stand out compared to our competition. And then particularly not only the undisrupted editor experience, so still having preview, drag and drop, inline editing, and the ability to make changes to page layout while managing a third-party application. That in itself is already cool, but I will also say that the support, the pattern that we use on a technical level really supports any front-end technologies, right? So there's no restrictions for the framework that you want to use for the application that you want to feed with content with dotCMS. I think is truly unique. So that could be a PHP application, .NET, Angular, React, Node, you name it. Really no restriction, really flexibility for technology teams to pick the technology or technologies to their liking without being restricted in that regard. I think is one of the things that really stand out. But again, that's me from dotCMS. I leave it to our customers and our partners to judge. Let me see. Some more questions. How does a headless CMS reduce vendor lock-in? Tony, I mean, can you share your take on that one?
Sure. So the idea is pretty simple, is that since the presentation layer is agnostic, you can put anything there. It can be absolutely anything. So you have really total control over what goes there, or you actually may have no control over what goes there, but the bottom line is that it doesn't matter what goes there. The integration capability in a headless CMS comes from the API. So a lot of times APIs are coming from third parties, and essentially it doesn't really matter what they are. So that's how vendor lock-in goes to very close to zero.
Yeah, no, I agree, right? Because in the good old days, or with monoliths, you are forced to work with proprietary frameworks provided by the vendor, and that in itself is the actual lock-in, right? Which means you need to have the capabilities, the skill sets in your development team to do this. And in a headless scenario, you can simply pick the technology A that you like, and B that your staff masters. So that's absolutely where the vendor lock-in is disappearing. A related question: how is IT staffing affected by going headless?
I would say very differently in different use cases. So the thing to keep in mind is that with the headless implementation, the content needs to be manageable by DevOps. In a headless situation, you're not going to have a lot of interaction between marketers and the content once the use case is taken live. So in some cases, that'll mean that IT staff will be reduced. In some other cases, it may be increased, and it really just depends on the nature of the content and the use case.
Yeah, no, I agree. Any more questions, folks? I got one more. In the real world, how swappable are the front ends of headless implementations?
I've seen them to be very swappable. I've seen CMS platforms, for example, drive the functionality of some of the functionality of ATMs or digital billboards. So in those use cases, the CMS was not developed to deliver content to those types of destinations, but in a headless scenario, it's very feasible.
Yeah, I agree, and I like the example of ATMs. We're actually working with Deutsche Bahn, a relatively large railway company in Germany, and they're actually using dotCMS in a headless scenario, and they want to expose content on board of their trains. So it's actually quite a cool use case, and one that fits in all the touch points that you called out in your presentation, Tony. So yeah, it's really happening, I would say. And again, I'm a huge fan of of this trend of headless CMSs, but I will say that I think hybrid will survive, because I do believe that in the end of the day, you can have a number of applications and that you feed with content in a headless scenario, right? But if I look at digital marketing teams and what they do, is they're really executing digital campaigns, and what they actually need for that is, from a CMS perspective, is landing pages. So what I see them do is really, I just want to crank out landing pages. And if you have to go back to your IT team every single time you need a landing page, I think that's not a feasible scenario. So that's where I think that if you work with a CMS that has a delivery tier as well, where you can set up templates for landing pages, that they also can make changes to without a single line of code, like in dotCMS, I think that's a model that is more feasible than pure headless, in my opinion. Okay, guys. Any more questions? Final call. Tony, any final remarks on this right topic?
No, I think we've covered a number of subjects there. I'd just like to thank everybody for attending and to invite anybody who wants to contact me to do so. Thank you, everyone.
All right, thanks a lot, Tony, and everybody else. Thanks a lot for attending us, and yeah, hope to talk to you in a near future. Thanks a lot.